A king asked his wise men for a phrase that would be true in victory and in defeat, in joy and in sorrow. They gave him a ring with the inscription, "This too shall pass." We end one year and begin another, as 10 years ago, as 100 or as 1,000 years ago. Our time now was the time of many others who lived before us. In each era and in each country arise people who stand out in their field, in their profession or in their domain. These men and women were great at what they did, and earned admiration in their discipline. In their time, these people were recognized. Their work, their works and their deeds were highlighted in their communities, cities and countries. Today, all of this is part of oblivion. Who remembers the Olympic athletes from 50 or 60 years ago, the singers and musicians from 100 years ago, the scientists from 200 years ago, the kings and conquerors of antiquity? Most remember Alexander, Newton, Shakespeare, Hernan Cortés, Mozart, Tesla, or John Lennon because they are some of the most important personalities of their fields in all history. But in each era, in each region, there were kings with majestic palaces, important heads of state, talented musicians and artists, excellent athletes, brilliant scientists. Many of them with important contributions, who today are barely remembered. Taking an era and any region like the 20th century and our country or our city, how many notable men and women have there been who today lie in oblivion? How many brilliant people have come from our region, from our cities, and from our universities who did important things in their science or specialty? I could name at random any more or less large city, and we would find a story of such a brilliant engineer who was taken to the best universities in the world, did important research and discoveries, and today few would know of him. Likewise, we could find an athlete of exceptional abilities, a great singer or writer. There are many admirable people whose memory has been lost or whom very few, relatives, scholars, or local institutions remember. During the coronation ceremonies of a new emperor, the Romans had the healthy and dissuasive custom of placing at his side an individual who, in that moment of maximum glory, would whisper over and over in the ear of the enthroned, "Remember that you are mortal. Remember that you are mortal." In this humble space centered on literature, we dedicate this video to recalling only some names of so many notable writers who have existed throughout time, who in their moment were acclaimed and read. Today they are barely named, nor are their books sold. In some cases their work has been irretrievably lost. In others it is only available in archives and libraries for researchers, and of a few, their titles can be found in old editions in second-hand bookstores or some very rare current or recent edition. If we speak of forgotten glories, better to begin with Agathon, talented dramatist, winner of the Lenaea, one of the most important religious and theatrical festivals of ancient Greece, a literary contest of antiquity, where this Agathon received the laurel crown. He introduced completely fictional characters and plots, without resorting to mythological arguments. His style was elegant and florid. Of this author and of his work today we know little. Only less than 40 verses of all his production are preserved, and most of the information we have of Agathon is from the mentions that other ancient authors make of him, like Plato, who included him in his dialogues. In the Symposium, a banquet is celebrated in his honor after winning first prize at the theatrical festival of the Lenaea in 416 before Christ. Aristophanes included him as a character in his comedy Thesmophoria Zeusi, dedicating special attention to him for his physical beauty and his literary talent. Aristotle praised him in his Poetics, highlighting his dramatic innovations. He was the first to write a tragedy with completely original characters and plot, anthos, not based on traditional myths. I do not know the reason why this illustrious dramatist was forgotten. Some argue that the following generations preferred the moral teaching of the works of Sophocles or the psychology of the works of Euripides. In our days, the works of these two great tragedians, Sophocles and Euripides, continue to be performed on the stages of the world. In all probability, the last time a work of Agathon was performed was in the region of Attica, in ancient Greece, about 2,400 years ago. Today this author is a footnote in classical studies. Alongside Agathon I could place other names, like Caesarion, inventor of comedy according to ancient sources, whose works were performed at Dionysian festivals. Today, Aristophanes is the great Greek comic playwright of Caesarion, considered in some sources founder of Attic comedy. Only fragments remain. Among so many, I prefer to focus the public's attention on Phrynichus, considered in ancient sources as one of the founders of the genre of tragedy. The Suda, a Byzantine encyclopedia of the 10th century, says of him that he was one of the pioneers in the introduction of female protagonists, and with them also of tenderness, piety, etc. To our era, only small fragments of his works have arrived. He was contemporary of Aeschylus, and was famous for his personal elegance and the beauty of his melodies, in which he frequently employed the trochaic tetrameter, a type of meter of ancient Greek poetry. An important trait of this dramatist is that he left aside the myths and drew inspiration from contemporary history for his works. The capture of Miletus, from the year 492 before Christ, constitutes a milestone in the history of literary reception. The piece portrayed the fall of Miletus to the Persians, an event that had occurred barely 2 years earlier that had plunged Athens into mourning. The performance was so visceral and moving that the entire theater burst into uncontrollable laments. As a consequence, the Athenian authorities fined Phrynichus 1,000 drachmas for reminding them of their own misfortunes, and permanently prohibited any future staging of the work. The fall of Miletus caused great sorrows to the Athenians. The fall of the Western Roman Empire marked the end of the ancient world. In the Middle Ages, intellectual, scientific, and literary production fell largely to the monasteries. Centuries later, immense archives remain with folios and parchments, many uncatalogued. The content of many of these archives corresponds to records, notes about work, accounts, etc. Others are copies of texts from antiquity and commentaries on them. They also wrote copious philosophical texts, especially theological ones, many of them boring for most people of the contemporary world. Naturally, poetry was also written, mostly religious, doctrinal or moral songs and praises. Among all this plethora of writings, ludic satirical Byzantine poetry stands out. In the 11th century, in the Eastern Roman Empire, abundant personal and occasional poetry appears. Within the varied modes and themes it treats, the satirical vein is the most suggestive, because in it are displayed before our eyes not only the extraordinary poetic and rhetorical capacity of its authors, but also a vivid picture of the Byzantine social and intellectual universe, especially that of the capital, Constantinople. Authors like Sellos, Christopher of Mytilene, John Mauropus, and Michael the Grammarian poetically elaborate their word darts against ecclesiastics who live outside the Christian rule, drunkards or too fond of the good life, against naive collectors of relics, against arrogant, greedy or false characters, and above all, against their learned enemies from opposing sides with whom they compete fiercely for a position at court. The poets of this period began to compile their own works under titles like Stikoi Diaphoroi, various verses. The poetry of this period is characterized by being occasional, that is, texts written to be read or performed in specific circles like the theatron, a sort of literary salon where the prestige of intellectuals was validated before their peers and patrons. Around a millennium later, very far behind have remained these meetings among ecclesiastics, aristocrats, high officials and scholars. Their writings are kept in the archives or libraries of monasteries, abbeys, convents, or private libraries. As a sample, we have an excerpt from a satire by Christopher of Mytilene, judge and military man who occupied high positions and who also dedicated his hours to poetry, especially to invective. The following fragment points against a certain monk Andreas who apparently collected relics of saints and illustrious characters. 10 hands of Procopius, 8 legs of Saint Nestor, 12 forearms of Saint Demetrius, 15 jaws of Saint Theodora, and 4 heads of Saint George. The 19th century lived the Industrial Revolution. Technical innovation multiplied factory production, provoked migration from countryside to cities, and the increase of inequality, with harsh conditions for workers. In the field of writing, it generated mass production of newspapers and magazines, many of low cost. The demand for authors and stories to entertain readers grew. In this era arose very well-known writers like Charles Dickens, Emile Zola and Fyodor Dostoevsky. However, the convulsive 19th century produced many other writers, some of them immensely popular in their time, the first best-selling authors, whose production has been relegated. In Europe, many women were prolific writers and authors of bestsellers. In the case of England, in the Victorian era, among so many whose name time has removed from bookstores is Charlotte Yonge, English novelist, recognized for her large number of written works, currently almost all out of print. She came from a religious family and devout of the Church of England. During her life she published more than 100 works, mainly novels. Part of her earnings she donated to charity. Young was also founder and editor for 40 years of the magazine The Monthly Packet, which had a very varied public, although it focused on British Anglican girls. One of her outstanding works is The Daisy Chain. This novel became one of the most beloved family chronicles of the era. The narrative follows the Mays, a family of 11 siblings who must navigate life after the accidental death of their mother in a carriage accident. The novel stands out for its focus on Ethel May, an intellectually ambitious and physically awkward heroine whose desire is to build a church in Coxmore, a poor and neglected area. Another of the many British best-selling authors of his time is Henry Cocteau. He was one of the most popular humorists of early Victorian England, specializing in novels that used physical phenomena or unusual abilities of his protagonists to orchestrate comic situations that, simultaneously, denounced the failures of the British institutional system. Born in London, Cocteau lived most of his life in the capital before moving to Berry Street, Edmonds, where he died after a life marked by initial literary success and later financial difficulties. One of his most notable works is Sylvester Sound, the Somnambulist. In this novel, published in 1844, the plot follows Sylvester Sound, a young man who suffers from a chronic sleep disorder that leads him to perform amazing feats and get into trouble while sleeping, without having any consciousness of his acts upon waking. The work plays with the misunderstandings and confusion of identity that provoke Sylvester's nocturnal incursions. It was extremely popular, selling more than 40,000 copies and remaining in circulation for decades. Outside England, Another Ship of Oblivion is the work of Manuel Fernández y González, undisputed master of the serialized novel in Spain, an author so prolific that he came to employ several literary ghosts. Born in Seville and educated in Granada, his life was marked by bohemia, overwhelming commercial success, and a profoundly pessimistic vision of the human condition, which only found solace in religion. Throughout his life, he published about 200 serialized novels. Despite being a forgotten author, one can still find his most important works with relative ease. One of them is The Pastry Cook of Madrigal, a novel from 1862. This is perhaps his most celebrated work, centered on the enigmatic historical episode of Gabriel de Espinosa, a pastry cook who was accused of impersonating King Sebastian I of Portugal after his disappearance in the Battle of Alcazacuévar. It is not a historical novel. The author sets aside rigor in favor of pure adventure, duels, and forbidden love affairs, culminating in the tragic trial and execution of Espinosa for crime of lèse-majesté under the reign of Philip II. To appreciate the magnitude of the great quantity of authors and titles, let us see the following fact. Only in England, between the years 1789 and 1919, between 40,000 and 63,000 novels were published according to a study by Alan Riddell of Indiana University in Bloomington. Already into the 20th century, in the United States, researcher John Edgerton records that in 1970 American publishers issued approximately 40,000 new titles of commercial books. From this wave of publications and authors, we can momentarily rescue Richard Pike Bissell. Born in 1913, native of Dubuque, Iowa, he was a river pilot and textile executive, graduated from Harvard. He combined his training as an anthropologist with his practical experience on the Mississippi River and in his family's factory, becoming a chronicler of the Midwest known for his ear for colloquial dialogue and his sense of humor. Some of his works became very popular, like 7 1/2 Cents, from 1953. It relates the conflict in a pajama factory in Iowa during a union strike for an increase of 7.5 cents, centered on the complicated romance between the new superintendent and a charismatic worker leader. Today, his books can barely be found in his own country. The eras and times do not look at whether an author is popular and best-selling to relegate him, nor does it matter if he is praised by critics, by the intellectuals of his time, or the quality of his writing. Who has read any of the following Nobel Prize winners in literature? Rudolf Christoph Eucken, idealist philosopher whose work is today almost unreadable, or Werner von Heidenstam and Henrik Pontoppidan, Scandinavian writers, or the German novelist Paul Heise, winner of the Nobel in 1910. Many reproach the Swedish Academy for giving the award to authors unknown today, and denying it to great authors who continue to be read, like Zola, Joyce, or Kafka. But if not even this prestigious committee is capable of evaluating and knowing which authors are the best of their era, what makes us think that we will be able to guess better? Not only in the countries of what is considered the Western Bloc does this happen. From the times of the Soviet Union is Alexander Fadyev, Russian writer, recognized in his time worldwide for his novel The Young Guard, a work that describes the operations of the Young Guard, a clandestine anti-fascist resistance organization that operated between 1942 and 1943 in the city of Krasnodon, eastern Ukraine. Many of its members were executed. It was the second most popular work of literature for young people in the Soviet Union for the post-war period, with more than 276 editions, above 26,143,000 copies. Joseph Stalin had great appreciation for the author, to the degree that once he came to declare that he was the greatest humanist that the world has ever known. Alexander Fadyev received the Stalin Prize, recognition that was given annually to various individuals in the fields of sciences, mathematics, literature, arts, and architecture, with the purpose of honoring great achievements. In the last years of his life, Fadyev became alcoholic, suffered from kidney disorders that, coupled with his fondness for drink and a severe depression, caused by the de-Stalinization carried out by the government of Nikita Khrushchev, drove him to commit suicide on May 13, 1956. His suicide note made very evident his disillusionment with the direction that the Communist Party of the Soviet Union had taken after Stalin, and was hidden by the KGB not to be released until 34 years later. In the note he wrote, "It is impossible for me to live farther from the art, to which I have given my life, since it has been destroyed by the ignorant and arrogant command superior of the party, and this evil cannot be amended. The best exponents of literature, a number that the Tsarist satraps could not even dream of reaching, have been physically exterminated or have died under the condescending and criminal gaze of those who hold power." The works of Alexander Fadyev can still be found with certain effort today, although it is not common to see him in bookstores, and they are very far from the popularity and recognition they once had. With this we finish today's video, concluding that time has unknown and strange criteria to decide which authors pass to posterity and which do not, and thus in many disciplines, merit and quality do not assure anything. In fact, there is no way to assure anything, and of those who are here today, we do not know of which their memory and work will be recognized by the following and distant generations. I did not make this video with the purpose of disillusioning anyone. On the contrary, I sought to remove importance from posthumous recognition. These authors lived the recognition in their era and enjoyed general admiration. The fact of not being read now does not affect them at all, nor us either. The words of the Roman poet and satirist Persius, who lived in the 1st century of our era, are forceful.